So tonight we're going to talk about nonprofit boards and your role and kind of your responsibilities. But first I want to kind of find out, just tell me why you joined the board and also what you want your legacy to be on the board. Anybody? Why'd you join the board that you're on? Yes. To give back to the community. And you're a new volunteer. You've only been in town for a few years. That's great. That's great. Anybody else? Why did you join the boards you sit on? Interested in the community? Yeah? Okay. Keep the library open and going and being a service to the community. Yeah. Others? Yes? Okay, take care of our seniors, yeah. Hopefully we'll all be there soon, or not soon, but at some point. Yeah. Yeah, that's our goal, is to someday in our future be a senior.
It feels soon, sometimes.
Others? Anybody else? As you sit on your board, what would you like your legacy to be? As we know, boards, you shouldn't be on a board forever. You know, you should eventually go off that board, right? What would you like your legacy? What would you like people to think and to say about you when you go off that board and how you committed and what you gave and what you did? What would you like that legacy to be? Yes? That you accomplished your goals. Fantastic. Yes?
We work a lot in the one I'm on with the Kansas UCLA Foundation, scholarships.
Uh-huh.
I'm working to secure partnership right now with Kroger, so I'd like to bring in 5 to 10 more grand this year in our scholarship network so that we can
provide more scholarships. So increase your funds to be able to provide more scholarships and give more back. Great. Others? What would you like your legacy to be? Yes? Honest and transparent, yeah. That transparency has become more and more important in our nonprofits. It's very important to be able to share not just the good things you're doing, but also just everything going on within your organization. So people look at organizations and they give and they donate to our nonprofits because they are investing in them. And that transparency is very important. Anybody else? We won't get into the age thing here. For your kids, yeah. So to keep it going and to be here for the future. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so kind of think about that as we go through tonight, but also kind of think about it as you work within your organization. You know, really, what would you like that legacy to be? Because, I say, at some point you will come off the board, right? At some point you will. So kind of think about that a little bit. So tonight we're going to talk about kind of the core function of your nonprofit organization, what it's really there for. We want to talk about the roles and responsibilities of the full board, but also as each individual board member, because there are some that overlap and there are some that are a little bit different. So we function as a board, but we also have to function as a committed board member. We want to talk a little bit about how to build a really strong and effective board. And we know that one of the things we keep hearing is we crisscross. Betsy and I work across all the 26 Hanson counties. And if you're not familiar with the Hanson area, it's basically Salina North and Salina West. So it's the 26 county area. But one of the things we hear a lot about meetings, and oh my gosh, we go to so many meetings, and meetings last forever, and gosh, I wish they could run better effective meetings. So we want to give you some pointers and tips on how to run, hopefully a more effective, but also a more efficient, so you're not, in your meetings all night long. And then we also want to talk a little bit about sustainability and growth, because we can only do so much as an organization if we're growing and we can financially do what we're trying to do with our mission and our goals and our outcomes. So as a well-functioning board, one of the reasons that we started doing this with our community foundations, and we've done it with all 26 of the community foundations in the Hanson territory, but one of the reasons we really wanted to do is that we saw some that were working really well in some areas, some and not some others, and we really wanted to be able to strengthen and just give them some tips and pointers so they could really be more effective in their communities and where they're at. But a well-functioning board will really keep that organization going, and then we'll keep it moving forward. It's not going to stagnate. It's not going to kind of fizzle out. It's really going to keep growing. It's going to kind of keep meeting those goals and those outcomes and those visions that you all have for your organization. We also know that if you're a well-run organization, and you're transparent and you're fulfilling your mission, we also know that people will want to volunteer. They'll want to be on the board. You'll be the board that everybody wants to be a part of. But we also know that when you're doing that well and you're functioning as a board, we also know that dollars will come in. Grant dollars will be more available because you're doing what you say you're doing. You're fulfilling that mission. But we also know the donors in your community will be more likely and more apt to give to a well-run organization. But the other big thing is you'll be fulfilling your mission. And what comes down to it, we're going to talk a lot tonight about mission. I don't know how many of you know the mission of your organization.
Mission statement?
Yeah, okay. We're going to talk more about that mission statement. So kind of be thinking if you know it, and if you have one, if you know what it is, but just a heads up on that. But it allows you to fulfill that mission, which is what why we join boards. And we've worked with some really dysfunctional boards, not just with our community foundations, but just across in a variety of different organizations that we become engaged with and involved with for a variety of reasons in our roles. And what we're seeing is if you have an organization that's not functioning well, you're going to lose staff, right? It's hard to keep staff if you have an organization and a board that's not functioning together and as a unit, as a team. We also know that funding is going away, right? People don't want to invest in you. People don't want to support you. Funders and foundations and other organizations, if you're not functioning, they're not going to fund you. Community doesn't respect what you're doing, right? And we've seen that with a lot of different organizations of different types across out here. And then as a board member, as a volunteer, when you're dysfunctional and you're on a board, there's a lot of anxiety and stress, right? You really don't want to go to the board meetings. There's too much controversy. There's too many issues. There's too many problems. And that's not what it should be on a board. Boards should be functioning well so that you want to come to the meetings, you want to keep it moving, and you're coming together as a team and you're working together. And of course, we've seen organizations close because they've not been functioning. They've had a bad board. They haven't been fulfilling their fiducial and their legal responsibilities. And we've seen a variety of organizations, not only just in Northwest Kansas, but across, have had to close. And a lot of it was because of misboard management and the board not doing what they were not only legally responsibility, but also what they personally volunteered and agreed and committed to do when they came on that board. So one of our sayings, and it fits so well, coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, but working together is success. And that's what we want you to be able to do tonight when we're done, is to really go back to your organizations and really start maximizing the success you've had to date, but really even taking it up to some new levels.
So we're going to talk a little bit about the core functions of a nonprofit organization. Very different from a for-profit organization, right? A business, but equally important in the community. So what makes an organization nonprofit? It doesn't mean you don't make money. Let's just get that off the table right now. Nonprofit organizations have to have money to function. So the IRS has 29 different 501 designations, those are non-profit organizations. There's 29 different kinds by the Internal Revenue Service. The very first one is a federal credit union or farm loan association. You've got fraternal beneficiary societies, some cemeteries qualified, chambers of commerce or business leagues, they can be nonprofits. Country clubs can be nonprofit organizations. And number 29 was qualified health insurers. Remember, before they sold, Blue Cross and Blue Shield was a nonprofit organization. So 29 different 501Cs, all nonprofits, right? This is the one we care about tonight, 501c3. 501c3, that's a public charity. So that means it's a religious, educational, charitable, scientific, literary, testing for public safety, or fostering national or international amateur sports, prevention of cruelty to children or animals, all those things. That's the IRS definition for nonprofit organizations, right? They all kind of fit in there somewhere, the work that we're doing. And that gives you tax-exempt status, which means that somebody that makes a contribution to your organization can write it off on their taxes, right? So that's good because there's no annulment. An annulment means no individual is going to benefit because of the nonprofit, because I make a gift to that nonprofit. So that doesn't mean you can't pay staff, right? Because they're actually just working for the betterment of the nonprofit organization. But what it means is that you can't pay, board members, just to come to the board, or volunteers or whatever. It's like the difference between a business and a nonprofit business is the fact that maybe you don't have shareholders that you're paying if you make money. For a nonprofit, all of the revenue that's produced goes back into the nonprofit organization. It may be used to pay your staff, it may be used to pay your light bill, may be used to offer a new program in the community or something like that. But all of the revenue for a nonprofit comes right back into the organization. So it's just like a nonprofit hospital in your community. They aren't paying shareholders if they make money. They're putting it back in to buy a new x-ray machine or give the staff a bonus or something along those lines. That's how we qualify profit or nonprofit. So the core functions of a nonprofit, basically, this is what the IRS looks for. That big, long definition on the last slide basically says, does it better the community? Nonprofit organizations have to operate for the betterment of the community, right? So what is your community for your nonprofit? How do you define your community? Is it your patrons, if it's the library? Is it your geographic community? Is it some sort of a demographic, seniors over the age of a certain age? That's our community that we're serving. Is it children under the age of 5? Is that the community we're serving? So community is a word that doesn't necessarily just mean the city or the county, right? So you have to operate for the betterment of the community. That's why, like a church or a public school or a city, they're not always 501c, but they're considered municipalities or public organizations. So they can also take donations. They're considered nonprofit because everything that happens there, again, goes back into their work for the betterment. So a church, the assumption is everyone is welcome at a church, and churches do things to make the communities better and stronger. So they're also considered nonprofits, right? Or the city of Hoxie, or whatever city you might live in, they're basically considered like a nonprofit because everything they do is to better the community that they serve, which would be the city. So you have to provide a service or services that fulfill the mission and purpose of your organization. So Betty said we're going to talk about missions tonight, and the point of that is that every nonprofit organization has a mission statement somewhere. You should know what it is, but don't feel bad if you don't, because lots of times we've done this nonprofit training and people have had to whip out their cell phones and look on their website and figure out what their mission statement is. But the point is that when you applied for nonprofit status, you had to tell the IRS what your mission was. That's why you were able to get nonprofit status. So everything you do, every function in your organization has to support that mission. So if you don't know what it is, you should find out. If you don't have a mission statement, that's a good thing to work on. So we talked about nonprofit does not mean that you don't have money. If you don't have an mission, you aren't going to get people to donate. No margin. Can't do your work, right? But if you don't have any margin, you don't have a mission because you can't do your work, right? No mission, no margin, no margin, no mission. In other words, you do have to have income. You do have to have money and finances to operate a nonprofit organization and fulfill your mission. Core functions of a nonprofit organization, your funding is going to come from one of these sources more than likely. Grants, donations, fundraising events, or some sort of direct service payment or sales. So let's talk about that. Grants. Where do you apply for grants? There's government grants, there's regional foundations, there's community foundations, there's private foundations in communities. So you go to grants. These are a few of the things you have to have more than likely to be able to apply for a grant. Proof of your charitable status, your financial position, any partners that you're working with on that project in the community, the timetable. Really the big one, how is it going to benefit the community? Every funder wants to know that. Is the project going to be sustainable? What are you going to do to move it forward if you don't get full funding? This isn't a grant workshop, so we're not going to go into a lot of detail on that, but there are grant workshops offered periodically in the area, and I'd recommend that if you want to pursue grants, that you attend some grant writing workshops. And then if you do get a grant, make sure you follow up timely with your grant report and your thank yous, those kinds of things. So this is a new page that's been put up by the Kansas Department of Commerce that we just found out about this week or last week.
Yeah, last week.
Last few days. And they have got a grants calendar now on their website. So these are going to be state grants, but very helpful. We have been asking for this for a long time as a place where people can just go and find out what's available out there, right? And so it's at the Department of Commerce. And you can't read this because it's small, but I just wanted you to know this is kind of what happens. You click on that grant calendar, and it's going to say, here's the grant, here's how much is available, here's how much match you might have to provide to qualify for that. Here's, when we're going to announce it, here's when the application period is, here's when awards will be announced, and here's the project contact. So really, they've done a nice job of creating a very helpful page for any kinds of grants that come out of the Department of Commerce. And we have seen in about the last 3 years probably a lot more money coming out through the state, a lot more grant opportunities out there. Some of it's been COVID money, other projects have been happening, but there's a lot more happening, and communities have had a hard time keeping up with what's available and getting it done. If you're doing government grants, you might also consider hiring a grant writer because they can be a lot more complicated than like a community foundation grant. So just a little bit of information on that kind of funding that you might look for your nonprofit. So the other way you get your funding as a nonprofit is through donations, right? Current donors to your organization, they're giving you money. Donors to similar organizations. I always tell people, you're looking for new donors, check out the annual reports and the websites of organizations in the area that are doing similar work. Those people might be equally interested in your organization and just not know about it, right? We're not stealing each other's donors. The pie's not finite, but you're introducing an opportunity for a donor that might be interested in the kind of work you do to also support your organization. And then new donors, new people that come to the community, or if you do some good marketing, people find out about you and can provide donations. So you use social media, we have posters, signs, table tents, etc., to attract donors to our organizations. Or if you have an actual campaign going on, I always say you should have direct solicitation, sit down and talk to your donors, tell them your story, find out what they might be interested in supporting. Letters, postcards, those things are good, but there is nothing that beats a conversation between somebody that's passionate about an organization. That's all of you, because you're sitting here on a Wednesday night listening to a board training, right? You're passionate about what you do. That comes through when you have a conversation with the donor. That's the best way to raise money, one-on-one conversations, right? And then always, always, always follow up with thank you notes, handwritten if you can, those kinds of things, as well as a tax receipt letter. Nonprofit funding. Lots of people like to do events, and events have a place, right? They bring people together. That's great. There's a lot of conversation and celebration, those kinds of things. They are so much work, and a lot of times do not really provide as much actual profit as you wish they did, because you're paying for meals, you're paying for rooms, you're paying for decorations, you're paying for whatever, those kinds of, all the things that it takes to put an event together, and it's a lot of hours of your time. So always ask yourself if you think the event is going to be worth that versus maybe a few conversations with donors that could reap you the same benefit financially. There are other values, in terms of having an event. It can be something that the community likes to gather around, and it brings a lot of exposure to your organization. They're not all bad, but I really caution you to consider events as your main fundraising opportunity. It really is not the best way to raise money, and it will wear out your volunteers and your staff faster. Direct sales or services, some organizations like a thrift stop, some of your funding comes in through sales, right, of the items that you have, or merchandise if you're a nonprofit but you sell t-shirts, those kinds of things. If you own property and you're renting it out and you have fees, et cetera, you can get income from some of those things as well. Be careful that you work with somebody in the tax world that can help you with unrelated business income tax, because even as a nonprofit, if you're basically doing something that a for-profit would do, like renting real estate, that's considered unrelated business income because it's really not connected to your mission. Back to that word mission, right? So your mission is probably not to own buildings and rent them out. But if that helps you fulfill your mission, it might be worth it. But you have to account for that differently in your taxes. So be careful about those kinds of things. Any questions about any of those? Okay. We're going to talk about responsibilities of a nonprofit board.
All right. So as a volunteer, as a board member, you basically have three duties as a board, okay? And as a full board, you've got the three duties. You've got the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. So you have, as a board and as an individual, you have a legal responsibility to your organization. Where I live, we had one organization that was having some embezzlement going on, and as soon as that came up and it hit that their staff person was embezzling funds, the whole board resigned, thinking they were now absolved of their responsibility. Well, they weren't, because they were the elected and the volunteer board that was in place when the embezzlement happened, right? So them stepping off the board at that point, they were still responsible for the actions of the board while they were on that board. And luckily it all got worked out, and of course the guy went to prison for a while. They didn't get their money back, and all those horrible things happened. But that legal responsibility is very important, and one that board members need to be aware of. So the duty of care is that you will participate, make sound and informed decisions regarding the whole organization's activities, all right? So you may serve on a committee within the board, but you are still responsible for that whole board and everything going on it. It's very, very important that you're aware of this. The duty of loyalty is that when you're sitting on that board, many of you wear several hats, right? You volunteer for a variety of organizations, but when you're sitting there and you're representing in that board meeting and they're making a vote, that's the hat you're wearing. You may have an interest in a project that's being discussed, or you may have an interest that, well, wow, if I vote to do this in this organization, it's going to hurt the other organization, right? Because we wear multiple hats in our communities. But when you're sitting in that boardroom and you're voting on that decision, you have to vote in the best interest of the organization that you're representing and voting, all right? It's not the other ones that you represent at other nights and other times when you're in meetings. It's the one you're sitting at and that you're voting on. You have the duty of obedience, which is that you agree to comply with all federal, state, and local laws and regulations, and that you will ensure that your organization is in compliance at all times, okay? Very, very important for all of our board members to be aware of those three very important legal responsibilities. And it comes back into it, too, that what you're doing is you're bringing that all back and you're committed to that mission, right? The mission of that organization that you're sitting there in that board. So the responsibilities of a board, just overall, you need to establish the mission and the vision for your organization. Do you know your organization's mission? Anybody? Anybody know the mission? Do you have one? Do you know if you have one? You have one, but you just don't know it. Okay. I'm going to encourage you to go back and find that mission and make sure that it's talked about and discussed. Make sure it's still fitting. Make sure it's still appropriate. And think about the vision. We talked about your legacy, but what's the vision of your organization, and where do you want that organization to go? What do you want to be doing? What's its future look like? So be thinking about that as a board. That is your responsibility, is that mission and that vision.
We do kind of recommend that on your board agendas you put the mission statement. So it's just right there. Every time you have a board meeting, there's the mission statement. So every decision that's made at that board meeting has got to be fulfilling that mission statement.
And if it doesn't, it's an easy vote, and you vote no, and you move on to the next item on the agenda.
Or if the organization has evolved since it started maybe 50 years ago and the mission statement needs to be revisited, then the board needs to revisit the mission statement.
It is your job to provide the leadership and to advise, right, the staff and the organization of what's going to happen, what can't happen. It's your job to promote. Carl did a great job tonight on the Next Tech internship program. Be able to talk about it and promote and tell people that you're on the board and this is what you're doing and these are some of the exciting things going on within that organization. It's the board's job to govern each other and the board as a whole. So if I'm your staff person on your board, for your organization. It's not my job to tell you, the board, you're not doing right. It's not my job to tell a board member, hey, you're not participating, you're not coming to meetings. That's the board's job, to govern themselves as a board and to govern each other, all right? So if you've got a slacker, or if you've got somebody not pulling the weight, that's you all's job. That's you all's team responsibility to come through and do that. How many of you have reviewed and looked at any of your policies, some of your procedures, or your bylaws? Anybody looked at your bylaws lately? You have? Good. Anybody else? You've looked at some bylaws? Good. Anybody else? Good. Any? You know you have bylaws, right? Right? Okay. We're going to recommend you review those bylaws every couple years. Take a look at them. Have a task force, a group, take a look at those bylaws and look at them every couple years. First of all, make sure you're in compliance. One of the things we found out during the pandemic was a lot of our organizations, because of the pandemic, were meeting by Zoom or by phone, right, by technology. It wasn't in their bylaws that they could do that. So do your bylaws allow you to vote and to use technology to hold meetings and or to vote? Okay? Just little things like that. Go back and double check. It's also a good review for you as a board to make sure that you are in compliance. Several boards may have that if you don't attend X number of meetings, then you're automatically off the board, right? But a lot of our board members and our organizations aren't aware that that's in their bylaws, so they're not pertaining to that. Some of them will have in there that you've got term limits, right? But nobody's paying attention to the term limits because nobody's looking at the bylaws, okay? So that's very important to come back to. As a board, you need to know about the policies and the procedures that are within your organization, and are they still pertinent? Are they still working? Are the staff implementing those? Are they following the policies and procedures, and are they appropriate for your organization today? Okay? Yes? Well, they have to go back to the board, and in your bylaws, it's going to tell you what you have to do, whether you have to put them out for, a lot of times you have to have them out to the board 60 days in advance before you can make a bylaw change. But your bylaws will tell you how specifically you could make changes in your bylaws and in your policies and procedures. So they can vary within different organizations. I sit on some boards where they have to be mailed out 60 to 90 days ahead of time. And it varies with the different organizations on that time frame. Some, yeah.
Some do.
Some do, some don't, yeah. So you'd have to come back to those bylaws and see what they are. But policies and procedures within your organization, make sure you're reviewing those as well. One of the easy ways to do policies and procedures is to do a couple at each board meeting. Put 1 or 2 on each board meeting and just kind of review them as a board, and that way you're not trying to do, maybe 30 or 40, depending on how many your organization has. You may not have any, and that could be an issue too. If you don't have any policies and procedures, you might want to kind of start thinking about what they could or should be, right? Because that also helps when you have board and staff turnover to have these documents and these things in place for the people that will follow you and for future staff.
So nearly every nonprofit, even if a small one, would have confidentiality policies so that you know that things that are said in the board meetings are being held confidential. And for small nonprofits also, sometimes if you're accepting donations, you need to have a policy on how that works. Who's getting the mail, who deposits the checks, those kinds of things, because it's important to have more than one person, not have one person handling all of that from start to finish, because it opens the door for accusations of fraud, even if it's not happening, those kinds of things. So if you may be thinking, we're a small organization, we don't have any policies or procedures, but I guess what we're saying is you probably should have some.
And you don't have to rewrite and recreate them all. They're out there already. Don't reinvent the wheel. Other organizations have those. And there's some good organizations and websites out there that can provide some sample, at least draft ones, that will give you kind of a basis of what you could or should have in some of your policies. Reviewing financials at each meeting or at a minimum quarterly, right? Finances are a big part of a nonprofit organization. And as Betsy said, if no mission, no margin, no margin, no margin, no mission. You need to be aware of what your finances are, what the income and the outcome is, and kind of how that whole picture looks, right? Because we've seen too many organizations get in trouble because they're not minding the finances, and maybe some bills aren't getting paid, or the taxes aren't getting paid, or some of the reporting's not being done. Here again, that's the board's responsibility to make sure that is happening. It's your job to hire great staff, right? And usually a nonprofit, occasionally if it's a really small one, if there's only one or two staff, volunteer boards may be involved in hiring more than one. But best practices is that the board hires the top staff person, whether it's whatever they call them, the executive director or the director, and then that staff person hires everybody else under them within the budget that you all approved, right? So you're not hiring all the staff. You hire one very good key staff person that's running your organization, and they're responsible within the budget that you provided them for staff and support to hire the rest of the staff that they need to run that organization, okay? So that is part of your job, is to hire that great person. But it's also part of your job to support and provide them the time, the budget, and the board leadership that they need to be successful. And key is to return those tax returns and filings. Remember, that was part of that responsibility, that you're going to comply with all the rules and regulations. Part of that is getting the reports in on a timely basis with the checks and the data and the information that needs to go in. We've seen, it happened a few years ago, and they do it periodically. You know, you've got your 501c3 status, and there's reports that have to go in on an annual basis to maintain that status. And every so often they'll come through and they'll sweep and go, whoa, you didn't file your paperwork, you just lost your 501c3 status, right? And we just had one that came through just in the last few weeks that had applied for a grant that when they went back to do the double check to make sure that they were a qualified legal 501c3, it came out that they had not filed their paperwork. They did not know it. So they got a denial on the grant because they had lost their status because they didn't do the paperwork. Okay? So paperwork's important, and it's the board's responsibility to make sure that paperwork's getting in on a timely basis. You are responsible to the organization, but all your constituencies. So Betsy was talking about whatever your constituency looks like, however you define that community, however you define the people that you're serving. You're responsible to the organization, but also to the people that you serve and that live in that demographic that you've defined. We've talked about maintaining and understanding the finances. If you're getting financial statements and you don't understand them, find out. Have somebody within the organization or another board member sit down and explain to you what the profit loss statement looks like, or what the income or income and outcome is, or they're doing cost accounting and you don't understand why we're in the red all of a sudden and then all of a sudden we're in the black again. How's this all work? If you don't understand those financials, learn it. As a board member, that's part of your responsibility, is to understand those finances. It's your job to set the budget, right? You come and the staff may come and they'll come and they'll give you a recommended budget, but it's your job as the board to approve that budget and to make sure that that budget is appropriate and that you've got the income and the outcome that's going to be appropriate for your organization to function for the next 12 months. And if you have a strategic plan, how many of you have a strategic plan for your organization? How many of you kind of know where you're going to go the next 3 to 5 years? Good, you guys do? Okay. Anybody else? Something to think about as a board is, where do you want to be in 3 to 5 years? What does your organization look like today, and what do you want it to look like in 3 to 5 years? If you don't have that plan, if you don't have it written out, if you don't have some agreement on what that looks like, you're not going to get there. You're going to keep doing the day-to-day and barely surviving and functioning, but you're not really going to be doing your organization justice or the community or the people you serve. That plan is very important to have laid out there so you know where you're going and where you want to be and how you're going to get there, okay? So make sure that budget aligns with where that plan wants to take you. Keep in mind the budget is a roadmap. You approve the budget at the beginning of the year, but it's okay if things happen, good, bad, or indifferent. Maybe you got a big cash influx. Maybe somebody left an estate gift and you've got some money and you can do some different things in the budget. Maybe you had something fall through and you've lost some funding and you've got to realign that budget. But that budget is a plan. It's in pencil. It's not in ink. So that's part of that job of reviewing to make sure you're in line with the budget. Here again, both with income and outgo. But you guys need to make sure that budget's aligning with where you need to go and that you've got the dollars to make it happen. And be realistic. I have sat on too many organizations as a staff and a board member, and they go, wow, we need X number of dollars. And they'll go, well, we'll just have the development program go raise more dollars. We'll just put all this overage over here on the development staff to try to do that, right? We need another $50,000, so we'll charge the development people to go raise $50,000, more than they've ever raised before, right? Is that real? Is that something that's real? Can they really do it, or is that possible for them to do that, or is that just a way to balance the budget so you can all vote and go home that night? Okay, so make sure that budget is based on reality and what can really happen and what you as a board here again are volunteering and committing to do to help make happen. It's not your job or your role to be controlling or micromanaging. If you have a staff person or if you have volunteers that are assigned responsibilities, let them do the job that they've been trained and assigned to do, okay? And I know some of you are volunteer, but I'm sure you have some volunteer assignments that specific people do. Let them do the job that they've been trained and they've been delegated and that they've been willing to step up and do, okay? Don't micromanage. Give them the tools and let them operate. If you have staff, you should not be involved in the day-to-day. Here again, that's the staff's job. Your job is to look at that overall big picture of the organization and make sure the tools and the items are needed for them to be successful, not to be involved in day-to-day. It's very important that a board acts as a unit and as a function and as one, not as individuals, right? So if you've got a tough decision going on and you're voting as a board and I go, wow, I really don't agree with this, and I voted no, right? But the board as a majority voted to go forward on this particular motion. It's my job as a board member to recognize and realize that although it didn't go the way I wanted to, the majority voted yes, so I'm going to be supportive of that project going forward and I will be on the team going forward, right? So if you're on the side that had the majority vote, that's fine. If you're on the side that didn't, it's a unit, it's an organization, and you're a part of that. And as an organization, as a board, you have to be willing to go forward for the good of the organization, right? So think about it as you're a team, you're one working together going forward in that regard. So you've got to act as a group, as one. You should never be uncommitted or uninvolved. Remember and think back about why you joined the board, what you want to happen, why you wanted to be a part of this board, what your interest, what your passion, what your reasoning for doing it, and make sure that as you're going forward that you remember those reasons when things get tougher or when time and you're getting a little bit tired and a little bit weary. Remember that you committed to be a part, to move the organization and to serve the population that you've agreed to be. So that being engaged, being involved, being really committed is part of your job. So how many of you are familiar with the 990? Some of you? Do your organizations do a 990? Most of them probably should be doing a 990,
All
right?
of them should be doing a
Yeah.
990.
Probably everybody should be doing a 990. Okay, it's required. If you think about, we all file personally and in our business, we file an income tax report every year. That 990 is kind of that income tax for the nonprofit, that income tax form for the nonprofit. A 990 is required to maintain your 501c3 status, and it's something that has to be done on an annual basis. Okay? So here again, you're going to be in jeopardy with your 501c3 status if you're not doing the 990. You may have somebody doing that 990 if you're not aware of. Either way, as a board, as an individual on that board, you need to find out what that 990 is, who's doing it, what it looks like, and make sure that that information is correct. Because you as a board member have signed off that that 990 information that went into the feds is accurate and appropriate information. Okay? 990s are available for everybody to see. You can Google your 990 for your organization if it's out there. I can Google any 990. Those are public information documents, and anybody can go out and look at that 990 for your organization that wants to do that. And let me just tell you, donors are doing that. Donors are very savvy. They're very intelligent today, and they know what's out there, and it's not unusual for donors to go look at a 990 of an organization because it tells them everything they need to know about that organization and how it's ran and how they're spending money and what's going on. I'd strongly advise you to check out, if you don't do anything else when you leave, go back and find the 990s for your organization and make sure that they're in there and be familiar with the information. Yes. Yeah.
If you're small.
Yeah. If you're a smaller organization, and that's, underneath that 50,000, in annual gross receipts coming in, you can do what's called the 990N, which is an e-postcard that goes in. It's less information, but it's still an equal important document. So Whether you do the 990N because you're a very, very small organization, or you do the full 990, you've got to be doing one or the other to keep your status, okay? Any questions on that? Some of you may be having it done by your accountant or whoever your treasurer is and doing some of that paperwork. But find out about that 990 for your own organizations. As I mentioned, it's not just about the money, it's about governance. It's about your overall organization. So some documents, some things that would be included on that are the documentation of your board meetings, your minutes. Okay, there's some information on the 990 and on your governance issues, on how you're handling the documentation of your board meetings. Conflict of interest policy. Who signs a conflict of interest policy every year? Carl does. Anybody else? That should be a policy that every board member signs on an annual basis. Okay? Here again, they're out there on the web, the internet, so don't worry about it. The whistleblower policy is another very important policy that should be considered, that you should be signing. Document retention. What are you doing with all the documents, the paperwork, the boxes of paper that are sitting around in your offices, your records, your minute notice, your meeting notices? Where's all that information? How long do you keep that information? What happens when you decide to get rid of it? As a board, you need to know those kinds of things. You need to know what's happening and what the policies and the rules that your organization has decided for those documents.
That can really become an issue if you've had the same person in a position for years and years, and we know that happens in small nonprofits, and we recently were working with an organization where that happened, and then the treasurer was no longer going to be the treasurer, and the new person got like a scrapbook with stuff in it and a box of stuff, and there was, notebook paper with donation stuff written on it, but nothing was really easy to figure out. So a document policy can be very helpful.
How many of you are evaluating the programs and the activities that you do? Whether it's a program for the people that you're serving, or it's programs from the fundraising, or it's just general overall organizational programming. How many of you are evaluating and really looking at to see what's working, what's not working? Why are we doing this? Should we be doing this? We've been doing it for 45 years is not a reason to keep doing things, right? Maybe you should quit doing some things. But that evaluation of your organization, the programs, how you're doing things is very important. It's okay to go, we've done this for 20 years. We don't need to keep doing it. Its time has come and gone. Or we need to be doing this a lot differently, right? How many of us are just doing it because we've always done it? But that evaluation of the programs and the activities and the different things you're doing, really evaluate those fundraisers and some of the activity you're doing. Excuse me. Evaluate some of the grants if you're doing that, and really look at the grant application and the process. Look at some of the programs and the offerings, and are those still needed, or is there another organization that's doing that, or maybe we should be partnering or collaborating with them on some of those programs. That evaluation is very important for you as a board and for the organization. How many of you do an audit within your organization? There's some internal audits going on. Something you might want to kind of think about. Here again, it just kind of helps clarify what the financial situations are. Make sure that you're in compliance with good accounting procedures. And whether you do a full audit or kind of a lighter, review, that's okay. But you should be having somebody kind of look at your finances, every few years or so, just to kind of make sure that your finances are okay and that you're still in compliance and that you're using best practices in the financing side. Sometimes we work with advisory boards. You may be an advisory board to an organization. So an example of an advisory board could be if you are like maybe say you're a VFW. Well, VFW would be...
It'd be like a local 4-H board.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Nonprofit status is really held by a larger body or a local scout troop.
Some of your service organizations would be... they would be an advisory because they actually fall under the status of the state organization or the national organization. So sometimes you may fall in as an advisory board, but you still should have the same policies. You still should be looking at these kinds of documents. You still should be looking at your main organization's 990 here again, and make sure, because that's the one that reflects back to you all. So even though you may be an advisory committee or board or in a capacity, you still need to look at the parent host organization that you fall under, and you should look at that advisory board and follow some of the same guidelines and responsibilities. So just to ensure that you're functioning at the max for yourself and for the organization. Remember that as a board member, you committed, right? So attend the meetings, right? Being at the meeting, that's where the action is. If you're on committees and you've got task force set up, attend those meetings. Be there ready. Be there, participate. Come engaged and ready to be there, both mentally and physically. Remember that commitment, as I said earlier, when you said yes. Remember how excited you were. Come to the board meetings, the committee meetings, with that same excitement. And think about, are you on board or are you just on the board? Okay? Are you on board or are you just on the board? And think about your fellow board members. You need people that are on board, right? That are really willing to work and take and move that organization in the direction you want it to be. We don't want people just on the board to fill resumes and to fill seats. I'd much rather be involved with an organization that has the opportunity for 15 board members and we only have 7, but those 7 board members are all on board, right? That's where we make it. That's where we start rocking things. Some issues where people, some of our boards we've seen have gotten in trouble. Remember that legal piece that we're all responsible for as we sit on the boards that we sit on. Some of the times that they've been in a little bit of trouble is they've not paid taxes, right? Payroll, it's real easy to kind of go, well, we don't quite have the money, we'll wait, right? Or, you know, they were gone for a couple weeks and on vacation, they got back and they kind of didn't get some of that done. But some of those taxes, you know, if you pay the taxes, they'll come after you on that one every single time. That conflict of interest policy, we've seen some times where we've had inappropriate contracts or any inappropriate decisions made because they didn't follow the conflict of interest policy, right? Here again, if you've got policies that if you're putting a bid out, you've got to have 3 bids or, you know, 2 bids or whatever that is, make sure you're following those policies. Make sure that you just don't give it to Cousin Joe because, well, he's really good and we've worked with him before, so we're just going to do that again. Make sure as a board member you're doing due diligence. It's okay to give it to Cousin Joe, but make sure that you've done due diligence and you've gotten other bids and you know that that's the best. Here again, for the organization because that's the hat you're wearing at that time. Employment laws and contracts. You know, part of the world we live in today is people kind of sue a lot easier and a lot quicker than they used to, right? So employment laws and employment contracts have become more of an issue in all of our nonprofits and in our smaller ones than what they used to be. If you don't have staff, you're kind of lucky in that regard, right? So that's a plus of not having staff. You don't have that one to worry about. But watch those employment laws and contracts and what you can or can't do. There are some very specifics. And the other big one we've seen is where people have had gotten hurt or harmed. Maybe you had a building or you had an event and somebody got hurt or harmed at it. You know, they got injured while they were at a function or receiving your services or an event you were having. So you need to make sure that you're taking care of the events and the activities so that when people are involved and engaged with your activity, they're not getting hurt mentally or physically in some way. Is this one yours?
No, it's yours, but do you want me to do it?
Yeah,
You're kind of
my throat
struggling
started
there.
to lose it. Yeah,
Okay.
sorry.
That's
I'll
all
take
good.
the last one.
It's all good. So, you know, as a board, you want to be accountable to the organization. So you want to have a good culture in your organization. So that's some of the things we've talked about. You have commitment. Commitment is a big part of your culture. You attend the meetings. And again, like we said, you address that in the bylaws. The reason we say you address it in the bylaws is because, you know, we all kind of know each other. We're not in real big communities, right? So so-and-so never comes to the board meetings. And we really feel like we need somebody in that position that's coming to the board meetings. So if it's in the bylaws, you can just say, you know, the bylaws say that if you miss X number of meetings, you're automatically considered resigned. We really appreciate the time that you've given us, but clearly, you know, it's not working for your schedule. Makes it so much easier to have that conversation because the bylaws say you have to be there. Now you can make exceptions. Somebody gets deployed or somebody has a family, illness or something like that. But it can be very helpful for you to have your attendance requirements in your bylaws. But the commitment is attendance. It's an annual contribution. Every member of your board should make a contribution, a financial contribution to your organization every single year, appropriate to whatever works for them. $25, $250, $2,500, whatever works for them, but every board member should be a donor. If you're going out to ask other people to contribute to your nonprofit organization, you better be able to say that everybody on your board is also contributing. Very important. And if you have a staff member that's going out and asking people to contribute and a donor asks them how much of your board has contributed to this campaign, they need to be able to say all of them. Very important. So that's part of your commitment, an annual contribution, your attendance. We like to talk about an annual commitment of participation. So this is just a tool. It's not a requirement, but it's a best practice. So at your board meeting, at the first meeting of the year or whatever, each board member takes out a piece of paper, or maybe you have put together a form that says, these are the things I'm going to do in the next year to move this nonprofit forward. So it might be, I'm going to have lunch with 3 people during the year to tell them about our organization and what important the work we do is that may not know about us yet. So I'm going to introduce new people to the organization. Or it may be, I'm going to attend 100% of the meetings, or I'm going to help with the fundraising campaign this year, or whatever it is. Because when you write it down, you're just far more likely to make it happen. You're more likely to make it happen. So you write that personal commitment to how I'm, as a board member, I'm going to do more than just show up and be at the meetings. These are the things I want to do to move our organization forward. We've set some goals together as a board, and this is how I'm going to help as a board member, right? So annual commitment of participation, volunteering to help with things within the organization, especially if you have a staff member. I mean, you hire a staff member sometimes and the board just thinks, oh, well, I don't have to do anything anymore because, Carl's going to do 100% of it or whatever. No, volunteer to help. It takes more people to make things happen. And it can be fun. And then if you get an email from someone on the board or from a staff member, respond. There's nothing worse than sending an email out and getting crickets back, right? Nobody answers it. You're like, did that email go out? Did I send it? What's happening there? So even if you can't respond immediately or you don't know the answer, just a quick response back that says, hey, I got the email and I'm, at home with a sick child or whatever, and I'll have to get back to you on that, whatever the case may be. A culture of accountability includes independence. So you are accountable, as Betty said, to the public, your stakeholders, whoever that might be. So you have to act that way. You have to remember that when you make a decision, you're making it for not only that organization, but all of the people that the organization serves. And you have to always serve the best interests of that organization, so prepare, engage, participate as a board member so you can make that happen. You have to have trust. If I can't trust that what I say in a board meeting is going to be confidential in a board meeting, then I can't have a good board meeting, right? If I don't trust the other people sitting around the table with me, that we're all working together, then an organization can fall apart in a hurry, and I have seen it happen. It's not a good thing. So trust, very important. Everybody's got to be working towards a common goal. And you have to earn trust from each other. You can't just assume, that it's there. Good information about what you're working on will help keep you trustworthy, and confidentiality and good appropriate discussions. It's fine to disagree. In fact, sometimes it's good to disagree in a board meeting, to have a conversation, to have somebody say, what about this? I'm not sure I understand why we're doing that, because then you can kind of hash it out in a positive way and figure out whether you're making the right choice or not. Do your homework and be prepared. We used to say, years ago when I did nonprofit training, don't walk into the board meeting tearing up in the envelope with the board packet, but nobody gets a board packet by envelope anymore. So what I would say now is don't come in with your phone in your hand immediately looking up to see what the agenda is. Make sure you've looked at it ahead of time and you're prepared. You're prepared for the discussion that's going to happen. Take advantage of opportunities. If there's a chance to come to a training, do that. Become a better educated board member. If you're a library board person, then maybe there's a conference you can go to about library boards, or have fundraising for libraries, those kinds of things. Look for those things and take advantage of those opportunities. Participate in your board committee meetings. Be willing to question and challenge each other at the board level in an appropriate way. And then know your job description. How many of your boards have job descriptions? Very good. This guy, he's raising his hand all the time. The kids, they've got it all figured out. It's the rest of us that need the help. A board member job description can be really helpful. It would say things like, I'm going to make an annual commitment. It's going to say how many meetings you have to attend. It's going to talk about responsibilities of the board. When you go to recruit board members, if you have a written job description, so much easier to be able to say, here's what the job is to be a board member. What we usually hear is, why did you join the board? Well, because so-and-so asked me to, and that's okay, but you got to follow up that ask with, here's the responsibilities of being on a nonprofit board. Candor, you got to be willing to talk to each other about things. You need to have those conversations in the boardroom, not in the parking lot. In the boardroom, not in the parking lot. Some people are nodding their heads. That can be a problem sometimes. People aren't willing to say what they feel like they need to say in a boardroom, but then they're willing to talk about it afterwards. The board chair, very important position. The board chair sets the tone for that meeting, helps control the meeting, how the tenor of the meeting goes. You should always have an agenda for every meeting. You should encourage discussion as a board chair. So in the board chair sitting in a meeting, you got 7 people around the table and one of them hasn't spoken a word. The board chair should say, we haven't heard from you on this topic. What are you thinking? Right? Everybody at the table should be participating. You should set goals. You should set goals, and then at your board meetings, you can say, how are we doing on our goal to whatever the case may be? Add a new program, expand to a new territory, increase our contributions, hire a staff member. Whatever the goal was, if you have goals, then at your board meetings, you can look at them and say, how are we doing? How are we doing? How are we making that happen? And the board chair should also have an effective, positive, efficient board meeting, and we're going to talk about how that can happen. We have done training in places that say, our board meetings last 3 hours every month. And I'm like, well, no wonder nobody wants to sit on your board, because that is a long darn time to sit in a boardroom every month. And there has got to be better ways to make that happen, right? You want me to keep going?
All right, yeah.
Here's some best practices, right, that for your board. You should have working committees. So here's a secret. It's not going to be a secret after tonight, right? You can have people serve on committees for your board that are not board members. It's a great way to vet new board members. It's a great way to let people get involved in your organization that may not have time or are unwilling to commit to being a full board member, right? So different kinds of committees can include finance or investment. Betty talked about, you may not feel comfortable reading financial statements, but a finance committee on your board, those people should know how to do that, right? You should still be able to look at the financials and understand enough to be able to ask questions, but a finance committee can be good. A governance committee can be, that could be all year round, but usually a governance committee kind of comes together when you're looking for nominations and they serve that role, or if you have an issue on the board, which you hope doesn't happen, but like Betty was also saying earlier, the board governs the board. So if there's a board member that's kind of gone rogue, the board has to control that. Typically that'll come through a governance committee. Development, that's raising money. Everybody can help, and maybe you don't want committees, but these are ideas. Marketing, sometimes it's great to get some younger people on your board that are really good at social media or can help you with a website, those kinds of things for your marketing committee, but maybe they're not a full board member. Or maybe they are, because having young people on your board can be awesome too. And if you do grants or give money away or something, you could have a separate committee for that. Don't have an executive committee. That's really passe. What used to happen is we'd have great big boards, and then they have executive committees that kind of made all the decisions, and people come to the board meeting and be like, I don't know why I'm here, because all the decisions have already been made. So that's really not considered a good structure anymore. Smaller boards, more involved. Nobody wants to just go to a board meeting and listen to a report and then leave. That's boring. I don't feel like I'm contributing. So boards tend to be 7 to 15 now, smaller. Everybody's able to participate and really provide input to the organization. Executive session, if you have a staff member, sometimes the board has to go into executive session to talk about personnel issues. You can't make a motion in executive session. You have to have a motion to go into executive session, a motion to go out, but you can't make any decisions. You cannot vote in executive session. You can only have conversation. You have to vote when you come back out. Board recruitment should sort of be ongoing and strategic. You should always have your eye out for that person that you think might be the next good board member, even if it's between times when you're actually recruiting. Term limits. This is always one that gets us in small communities. Term limits. Do you have term limits on your board? I mean, people are like, I have been the board chair for 14 years, right? Because nobody else would do it. Term limits, we recommend them. There's good reasons for that. We say typically 2 3-year terms. That's 6 years on a board. Take a break. If you want to come back on, great. Serve as a volunteer in between, great. If you're really passionate, that's fine. But it gives an opportunity for new people to get involved. So, sometimes we hear, well, nobody wants to serve on the board. And sometimes that's because nobody will get off the board so somebody else can come on, right? So term limits are a good thing. People that have served on your board for a long time remain ambassadors for your board and your organization in the community.
They can serve on your committees.
They can serve on a committee. They can be very positive for you. There's lots of ways to serve an organization outside of just being the board member, right? We also recommend that the board chair position be at least 2 years, because about the time you sort of figure it all out, if you're on a 12-month chairman, then you're off the chairman and somebody else is trying to figure it out. So if you do a 2-year, then we used to like to recommend a 4-year commitment, which is a long time, but you come on as the vice chair for a year, you help the chairman, you kind of learn, right? The next year, you step into the chairman position, and you kind of figure out what you're doing for a year. And the next year, you're the chairman, and you really know what you're doing, and you've got a vice chair behind you then that can help. And the last year, you're helping that chairperson. So anyway, at least a 2-year commitment. Every 12 months is not the best practice for changing chairman, because it's just a lot to figure out in a 12-month period, and about the time you get the hang of it, sometimes you're off the chairman's position. Job descriptions, we talked about that. Annual commitments of your time, your talent, and your treasure. Annual evaluation of the board. How are we doing as a board? Have we kind of met our goals? How am I doing as an individual board member? Did I do the things I said I wanted to do this year to make the organization better? And then annual conflict of interest, confidentiality, and whistleblower forms. So those are the 3 big ones to make donors to your organization believe that you are fiscally sound, responsible, good, solid organization for them to donate to. Nobody wants to hear at the coffee shop how much somebody else donated to your organization. That is a bad thing, right? It's all got to be confidential. So your board meeting best practices, all your decisions, again, based on the mission and vision, goals. That's why we say put that mission statement on your board agenda. Regularly scheduled meetings at least 6 times a year. If you only meet quarterly and you miss one meeting as a board member, then you've gone 6 months without knowing what's going on. Too long. So at least 6 times a year if you don't want to meet monthly. A lot of boards will meet like every month, except they take August and December off, for vacation and Christmas or whatever. That's another option. Make sure you get your materials out in advance, whether you're the board chair and you're providing those, or if you have a staff member that's providing that agenda, so people can come to the meeting prepared. Give them time to read it and review it. Make sure you have the appropriate time set aside. If you've got a big issue to talk about at your meeting, you might want to make sure that the rest of the agenda is really tight, so that you have plenty of time to discuss whatever the bigger issue that you're talking about is. But make sure your board meetings are action-oriented, not just we're going to sit and listen to a report for a really long time and we're all going to kind of go to sleep because it's the same information we hear every month. No. What can we talk about? What did we do? How do we challenge each other? How can we get better? Make your board meetings action-oriented and focused, but don't just, stay to a time frame. And then make sure you have good goals and outcomes that you're discussing at your board meetings. We set the goals. How are we doing on them? What are the outcomes? Hey, we achieved that goal. Let's set the next one. Or this goal has been thwarted because it's maybe it's a building project and we can't get a contractor. So what are we going to do about that? How are we going to do? Maybe let's pick a different goal to work on right now. So best practices. At least 3 days in advance, you get any written committee reports. So if you do have committees, which we think are a great way to work, they have them send a written report, and then at the board meeting, you've already read that report. You do not have to sit in the board meeting and listen to someone read you a report that you got, because the expectation is that you've already read it. So then the board meeting is about, hey, it looks like this happened at this meeting, and that's how it affects this goal, and let's talk about it, right? Not let's just hear what the committee did, right? Financial reports, minutes of the previous meeting, any grant applications or approvals, if you have that kind of work in your organization and your agenda, all that should go out at least 3 days before your board meeting. So you have plenty of time to review it and be prepared, right? Consent agenda. Does anybody use a consent agenda? Excellent. What's your organization? School board. Good for you. So a consent agenda says certain items that you review at every meeting, like committee reports, maybe, could be, or financials sometimes are on the consent agenda. You just one vote, because the expectation is you have read that material. You are prepared to just approve it. It's kind of a, regular item that you're going to review every time. You don't need to take a lot of time at your meetings for those consent agendas. Very helpful. Any board member that has a question about something that might be on the financials or that might have been on that committee report, you can ask to take that off the consent agenda. You vote on the consent agenda, then you address that issue, and then you vote on that item. It's very easy. We had one organization, it cut their meeting short, I am not making this up, by 3 hours. It took 3 hours off their meeting because they started using a consent agenda. We showed up at a meeting where one of their board members who had been at the board training was at another meeting, and they came up, put their arms around Betty and said, "Thank you. You saved us 3 hours of our board meeting. It's been wonderful." So consent agenda is very helpful. So this is your agenda, really. You got your consent agenda. You got the old business, stuff that you've been talking about, right? Your goals, things that you've already worked on. Any new business that comes up, right? And then new business could also include like board education. So if you're working on a big project and you feel like this is new information, you can do a little education at your board meeting. Maybe you watch a 5-minute video on something. Maybe you're building houses because you're on the Housing Authority board, and you can watch a video on a new kind of housing project that they're doing in another part of the country or another part of the state, or things that you can do to educate your board, keeping it fresh, teaching them new things, helping them advance your mission. All really good things to do. So basically, this is your board agenda. You've got your consent agenda, your old business, your new business, and hopefully some education. Very simple. Everything should fall under one of those categories.
Yes.
It's all good. Okay. Okay. So you identify the error and the correction, and you approve the minutes as corrected.
So like the correction could be that maybe the financial number, the amount in the treasury was wrong, maybe. So you just go, it was brought up that the amount was wrong, so the minutes are approved with the changed amount.
Right.
Going on.
Or
It's
so-and-so was listed as absent and they were present,
attending.
or, whatever. I mean,
So you list the corrections, and then the minutes were approved as corrected.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah. And then that becomes an official part of the records going forward.
yeah. So then the minutes, for that meeting would say, the minutes were approved with the following correction or whatever, so.
Yeah.
Other questions? questions about board best practices or meeting practices?
Anything?
Okay.
All right.
You know, it's kind of a culture thing within
Yeah.
an organization.
I've been on both. I've been on boards where the minutes, it could be a lot of conversation, a lot of activity, and the board minutes may be a page. And I've been on other boards where the minutes can be 3 or 4 pages because they put everything in there. I would say summarize briefly and very short what happened and what the action was. You don't necessarily need to put in all the conversation and all the dialogue and everything going on. If there's some key points brought out, maybe put those in there. But it's really about what the motion was, and was it passed, or was it voted down? And that's really what you need in the minutes. Is
So-
the action taken or not taken and voted on?
So I a lot of times see in minutes, there was considerable discussion. If it was a really hot conversation, there was considerable discussion about XYZ, whatever. Then the motion was made by so-and-so, seconded by so-and-so, motion carried, 5-1, or,
Yeah.
Unanimous, whatever. That's pretty typical, kind of how it would go. But it is good to document if it was a really considerable conversation in
Yeah.
some way. You don't have to be real specific, but, there was considerable discussion regarding whether or not to do something, or,
But they don't need to
whatnot.
be word for word verbatim of the whole meeting. You summarize quickly and briefly and go on.
And
Yes.
anybody that had a conflict of interest has to be noted in the minutes. So, Betsy didn't vote because her husband was one of the bidders on, the project that we were voting on, or whatever the case may be, or, we were making a grant to an organization and she sits on that board or something like that. So that all should always be noted in the minutes too.
It shouldn't. It should be an organization culture and kind of how your organization functions on minutes. It shouldn't be a person to person. No.
You don't?
No.
No.
In fact, that will probably come back to bite you at the end of the day if you do that, to be quite honest. But yeah, it should be an organization policy and how the minutes are going to be set up and established, not the individual note taker.
And of course, the board gets to review those at the next meeting and make corrections if there's an issue. So, you're good. I've also served on boards where there was kind of a template that the secretary used, to help fill it in. So that kind of kept it in the same
Kept
order
the formatting
every
of the
time.
content
The formatting
more
was similar.
consistent as opposed to person doing it differently.
And that can be helpful if you're ever going back and trying to look for something in minutes. I mean, now again, most of it's electronic and you can do a word search or whatever. But if you're having written minutes, it can be
Yeah.
helpful
And the
to
minutes
know
should
which-
follow the format
where
of
it's
the
gonna be.
agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be the action taken, or, Yeah. Well, and that's a good reason why you don't want all that other stuff in there that he said, she said.
'Cause
Because
you're
when
trying
you're
to
looking
find
for the
something.
real information and why you're doing what you're doing, you want to be able to find it quick and easy. So-
Here's what the discussion was about, here's what the motion ended up being, here's if it passed or didn't pass, or got tabled or whatever. I mean, that's really what needs to be in the minutes, because that's the record that you need.
Other questions, comments? Yes? Who's ever what? Can the board chair make a motion? They should not. They could, but they should not. Should be
Typically
somebody
not.
else.
Typically, the board chair only votes if there's a tie.
Yeah, they shouldn't make a motion and they shouldn't vote.
And if you have committees and they send a recommendation to the board, it comes in as a motion and only needs to be seconded.
No,
They shouldn't.
yeah. They're there to facilitate and run the meeting and put the agenda together. Good questions. Anybody else? Yeah, this is really based on best practices, not specifically open. We're actually probably both familiar with the Open Meetings Act, but yeah, it's all pretty comparable and pretty similar.
And a
Yeah.
nonprofit organization does not fall under the Open Meetings Act either, so, yes,
Yes, yeah.
yeah.
They're good practices to utilize, for sure.
Right.
But you don't have to worry about some of them if you fall under the open meetings. But and somebody mentioned earlier about being transparent and open. You know, that it's to follow the Open Meetings Act is being transparent and open, and it's a good model to follow for that reason. Yeah, it's a good model to be open and transparent, and to be aware that at any point somebody could come in and ask, and you should be comfortable sharing that information because you're running the organization appropriately and legally and fairly. Yeah, that's always the way I've always functioned. Is that if somebody wanted to come in, or if my grandmother read it in the newspaper the next day, she wouldn't be embarrassed because of the organization I'm involved with, because we were doing things the way they should have been done. And it was okay to be on the front page of the newspaper because we were doing what we should have done. So to me, that's just a good model that I've always followed. You can put them on your website, yeah. You know, it used to be some of the newspapers, our small town newspapers would run them, but of course we're not doing that as much anymore. But, you know, just have them on your website if you want to, that's fine.
If you want to, but typically a nonprofit organization does
Yeah.
not publish them.
But
and
it's perfectly okay if you
it's
want to.
okay if you do,
Yeah.
but it's not a necessary thing. It's not,
It's not required like it is
it's not
for
frowned upon if you
schools
don't.
and some others. Yeah. But here again, there's nothing wrong. It's just not required. So how many of you have staff? Several of you have staff that you work with, right? And the board's working closely with staff. So the top staff person's job, whatever you call that top position, they make the operational, the day-to-day decisions. You all set the guidance, the overview, the big picture, remember? They make those operational. They can hire and move and remove, hire and remove staff within the budget. So if you give them a budget, as long as they're within that budget and they're within that line item, they can do because you have authorized them to do that. They create those operational policies and make sure that they're functioning and that the organization is working. You all may review those, but they actually create them. It's their job to keep you as a board educated, informed about things going on within the organization, to do a director's report per se. It's their job to keep you informed about what's going on in the industry, what others are doing that are in similar organizations. And it's their job to bring, ideas documented with research and some solid information to you. That is part of the job of the staff, is to help guide and direct you as to what you could or should be doing and looking to in the future. Your job is to set those goals and expectations of the staff, and they need to be reasonable and they need to be, doable, and you all need to be a part of helping make those goals and expectations happen. It's your job to help and support them when needed, to be there for them. Not day to day, not minute, but to be there and be supportive. Through the years, as organizations have hired more staff, the boards get real excited because they go, wow, we've got more staff. That means we as the board have less to do, right? Well, if the staff are doing their job and the board's doing their job, when you hire more staff, the board's probably going to be just as busy or busier, because now you've got more activity and more programs and more opportunities to be involved and be engaged. So, more staff can increase a board's responsibility, not decrease. Both are good. Both are positives. Remember that successful boards include doers, donors, and door openers, right? So we need people on our board that are going to volunteer. We need people, all of our board members should always be a donor. Betsy talked about that. It's very important that as a board member you're financially supporting. But it's also your job to open doors and to create opportunities for your organization. And at different times you may wear a different hat between being a doer or a door opener. You should always wear the donor hat. But you could vary, and sometimes you could be wearing all three hats for your organization when you're really in the right spot. When you're discussing in meetings, how many of you discuss the same items time after time and meeting after meeting and you never take any resolution on it, right? Have a discussion, put a time limit on it. It's okay to put, we're going to discuss this for 15 minutes and at the end we're either going to vote it in or we're going to vote it out. We're going to vote on this. We're not going to keep discussing, as I say, cussing and discussing the same item. And when you make that vote, decide who's responsible, who's going to make it happen, and what's the time frame to make that happen in. All right? Put some details to that motion. Put some action behind it. Put some commitment behind it. But don't just go, well, great discussion, no action, right? That board chair needs to go, okay, do I hear a motion on what we want to do with this? We're either going to quit discussing it, and that could be the motion. We're going to take this project off the table and take it off the agenda, and we're done with it, or we're going to move it into a task force, and maybe the task force is going to come back with recommendations, whatever. But don't keep hashing and rehashing the same topics every time. Take action or get them off the agenda, right? Because that's where our meetings get kind of long and out of control. You should have short-term and long-term goals for your organization. We talk about that mission, that vision. What is that vision? What are the short-term goals? What do you want to accomplish in the next 3, 6, 12 months? What do you want to accomplish in the next 3, 4, 5 years? And those short-term goals should be getting you to those long-term goals. And that's when we talk about business, the agenda items, those goals, that's what Betsy was saying. Those goals should be on there, those short-term goals and long-term goals. When you're making motions, how does that motion fit in with your short-term and your long-term goals and your mission? That should all come together. It should be all a very nicely wrapped package of your goals, your mission, your vision, right? And your topic, your meeting discussions should all be based on those items. Communicate, 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 right? We get in more trouble when we're not communicating. And it's best when you can to put it in writing, right? Conversation, some people are visual, some people can hear it. Make sure that you're meeting the needs of the different members of the board as to what they need. If they need a document to look at, make sure it's out in that packet early with the agenda, right? So that people have that information and they can absorb it how they need to. But that communication and being able to talk, being able to have those tough conversations, being able to agree to disagree, being able to bring up questions and doing it politely and appropriately and not being in an attack negative mode, but to be able to have those conversations, to be able to communicate. Plan and follow the plan, right? How many of us have sat through strategic planning, which was a great process, and then we set the notebook on the shelf and we never implemented the plan, right? Plan, but follow the plan, all right? Make sure that agenda, make sure that board chair is coming back and that plan is part of your agenda, okay? Plans are useless if we don't implement the plan. And keep your decisions based on that long-term vision. As a discussion comes up, is this a part of our long-term vision? Does this fit our mission? Does it fit where we're trying to go? Is it going to help us take us where our goal and our plans and where we want to be in 5 years? Makes discussion and voting much easier. Are we preparing for the future? Are you all just running your organizations day to day and trying to survive, or are you really planning for the future? As a board, you need to be looking at the big picture. You need to be looking down the road. You need to be looking, where do you need to be? Where do you want to be? Are we diverse? Does our board, does our organization represent the community and the constituency we serve? Or are we kind of not totally representative of what we are trying to accomplish? Do we know our community? Do we know how our organization fits in the community? Do we know how the programs and the offerings of what we're doing, do we know how those fit into our community, and are they still appropriate for today, and will they be in 5 to 10 years? Are we staffed appropriately? Do we have the right number of staff? Do we have the right people in the right positions? Do we need to redesign our staff structure? Do we have people doing things that they're not very good at, and maybe they should be doing some other things? Right? Don't get locked in and boxed into what you've always done. It's okay to shuffle things around. I was working with one organization, and the executive director had retired, was moving on, and they brought the development person up to run the organization. And she really was very good at development, and that was her strength. And she wanted to maintain the development, but she also knew she had to take on the management responsibilities of the organization. So they restructured that organization so that some of the management responsibilities that the former person was doing, because he enjoyed doing them, could be moved into a different kind of position, and she could maintain a portion of the development program, which was her strength and what her as an executive director could and should be doing. But they restructured the whole staffing of that organization to meet the current staff and where they were going and what they were trying to accomplish, right? They kind of got rid of the old structure and put a whole new structure in place. and it's working very well for them. So don't get locked into what you've always done. It's okay to be a little creative on some of that. Are we using our volunteers wisely? Are we burning them out? Are we using them wisely? Special events, as Betsy said, can burn out volunteers quicker than anything, right? So are we using their time wisely? Do we know specifically what we want them to do and how we want it to do, and when that needs to be done? Are we conscious of what they're doing and how they're doing? Are we effective as a board? Are we as effective as we could be as a board, and if not, should we be doing? Do we market our organization? Do we talk about our successes? One of the things that our nonprofits always have a problem with is they don't talk about the good things they're doing enough, right? We kind of get caught up in what we need to do or what we could or should be doing, but we don't talk about the good things that we've done. We don't brag about ourselves. We don't talk about the numbers that we've been helping. We don't talk about those special stories of how we helped a client, or we helped a business, or we helped a student, or we helped a senior, or we helped a scholarship student, and the difference in the college and where they're able to go because of what we were able to do. Those kinds of stories help us as an organization feel good, but they also help the community and the people we serve recognize the role you play and the importance and the benefit that you bring to their community. It takes a team, it takes staff, it takes volunteers, and it takes a written plan to go forward. And when you have that, you'll really see your organization start moving and start going forward. If you really want that success, get staff, get volunteers, and get a written plan so everybody's moving in the same direction and going forward together. Everybody is going forward as one unit, as one team as you go forward. And a quote we'd like to end with is, no one of us can do as much as any number of us working together, right? It takes all of us. No one person can run an organization, and nor should they. It takes all of us with our own skill sets, our own passion, our own interests, and our own reasons for being a volunteer to make the organizations go and to be able to serve our communities. So thank you all. We're open. We're here for questions, comments. If you have anything, we'd be glad to answer any of them that we can. We appreciate your time tonight. We appreciate you being here, and we appreciate what you do as a volunteer and as a community leader.